everyone. In this video, we're going to go over the anatomy of the heart, and we're also going to study blood circulation. So the objectives of the lab for today is going to be able to identify all the structures in the 3D rendition of the heart and on the physical models as well. In addition to that, after we have familiarized ourselves with the structures of the heart, I'm going to go through the pathway of blood flow in both the adult and the fetus, and you're responsible for knowing the pathway for both. So let's start off with the external anatomy of the heart. This is the heart that has not been opened, so we cannot see the internal chambers. What we could see looking at this anterior view of the heart is the apex region. The apex region is actually at the bottom right here, and the base is at the top of the heart. If you notice, the heart has 4 chambers. The mammalian heart has 4 chambers, but if you look in this picture, we cannot see the 4 chambers because it's actually not open yet. What we do see are the 2 auricles. These are the 2 ear flaps that are covering the top 2 atria. So these are the auricles right here, and they help increase the surface area of the heart. In addition to that, because the heart is a muscle, it needs its own supply of oxygen. So we have the right coronary artery here, and then we have the left coronary artery that is actually behind the auricle, but this is the left coronary artery that's starting right here. And then the circumflex artery is an extension from the left coronary artery, and it actually wraps behind your back. And again, these arteries provide blood for the heart. In addition to that, you can also see the anterior interventricular artery. So this right here is the anterior interventricular artery, and there's also a posterior one as well. You can use this anterior interventricular artery as a landmark to separate pretty much the right side from the left side of the heart. There's also the great cardiac vein, which is represented by this blue vessel here. So we talked about the arteries which brings blood to the heart. The great cardiac vein is going to drain that deoxygenated blood away from the heart. Now, the anterior interventricular artery and the great cardiac vein are both sitting on top of this groove called the interventricular sulcus. So this groove right here houses the anterior interventricular artery and the great cardiac vein. Again, you can use this groove as a landmark to separate the right from the left side of the heart. And in addition, the interventricular sulcus, it has the word ventricular and inter. So it is essentially the groove in between the ventricles. Now, let's take our attention to this portion right here. You find the ligamentum arteriosum, which is a connection. It's actually a connection between the aorta and the pulmonary artery. And we'll talk more about the ligamentum arteriosum as we proceed with the pathway of blood flow. All right. So with that, let's actually now open up the heart. Now, when we take a look at the heart that is open, we can actually see the 3 muscle layers of the heart in closer detail. So the outer layer of the heart is called the epicardium. You can see this is the outer layer of the heart right here. The largest muscle layer of the heart is called the myocardium. So you can see the myocardium right here. And the myocardium is the layer of the heart that actually does contribute to a forceful contraction when your heart is pumping blood. Now, the most inner layer is called the endocardium. So you got endocardium, myocardium, and epicardium. So those are the 3 muscular walls, the 3 layers in the muscle wall. Okay. All right. So now let's go ahead and start our pathway of blood flow. The mammalian heart has 4 chambers. The two chambers on the top are called the atria, and the two chambers on the bottom are called the ventricles. This is the right side of the heart, and this is the left side of the heart. Remember, this orientation is looking at that individual. So if you were to look at someone from the anterior portion of their body, this is their right side and this is the left side. Now, with the two atria, you can think of it as the word atria. It starts with the letter A. So A is the first letter of the alphabet, so it's on top. You can also think of the attic, which also starts with the letter A. The attic is found on top of the house. So with the two atria, this would be the right atrium, and therefore this would be the left atrium. Remember, these two atria, they were covered by the auricles that I showed you earlier. Now moving on to the bottom chambers, we have our two ventricles. This is the right ventricle here, and this is the left ventricle. So those are the four chambers of the heart. Between the two ventricles on the bottom, we have an interventricular septum. This is similar to the interventricular sulcus that I showed you before, but the sulcus is the groove that you find on the outside of the heart. The septum is actually the structure that you find within the heart. So here the heart is open up. You find the interventricular septum. So it's a separation between the two ventricles. It divides the right from the left. Okay, let's go over and discuss the blood flow, and this is the blood flow in the mammalian adult. The blood that is returning back to your heart, these are blood that are deoxygenated because they have already released the oxygen to the various cells in your body. So the blood that is returning back to your heart, it's returning back to the heart to get oxygenated. Deoxygenated blood that is returning to your heart from the upper part of your body is going to return to the heart via the superior vena cava. So this is the superior vena cava right here. Deoxygenated blood from the lower part of your body is going to return back to the heart via the inferior vena cava. So this vessel right here is the inferior vena cava. Both the superior and inferior vena cava are going to drain that deoxygenated blood into the right atrium. So the right atrium is carrying oxygen poor blood. The right atrium, when it contracts, will send the blood through the tricuspid valve into the right ventricle. Now, this is the first valve that we are going to discuss. There are 4 heart valves. There are 4 chambers, so there are 4 heart valves. The functions of the heart valves are to prevent the backflow of blood. So right when blood goes from the right atrium to the right ventricles, it cannot go back to the previous chamber because these valves ensure that blood flow in one direction. So this is the tricuspid valve right here. Okay. From the right ventricle, blood is going to be sent through the pulmonary valve. This is the second valve, into the pulmonary artery. This is the pulmonary artery right here. This curvature part, that is the pulmonary trunk. The pulmonary artery is going to take that oxygen poor blood to the lungs to get oxygenated. Now we have lungs on both our left and our right side. So therefore this would be the left pulmonary artery and this would be the right pulmonary artery. So once the oxygen poor blood goes to the lungs, it gets oxygenated. The carbon dioxide that was in your blood, that is what you exhale out, and then you inhale in oxygen. The oxygen that you inhale in from your lungs will get picked up and sent back to the heart via the pulmonary veins. So these are the pulmonary veins here, and these are the pulmonary veins on the other side of the heart. The pulmonary veins are the vessels that are carrying the oxygen-rich blood, the recently oxygen-rich blood from the lungs back to the heart. So now the pulmonary veins are going to drain that oxygen-rich blood into the left atrium. The left atrium contracts, sends blood through the third valve, which is the mitral valve, into the left ventricle. When the left ventricle contracts, it sends the blood through the fourth valve, which is called the aortic valve, into the aorta. The aorta is the largest artery in your body. You'll notice that there are three branches of the aorta. When the blood reaches this part, we can break up the aorta into the ascending aorta. This is the aortic arc. You also have some blood leaving from the thoracic aorta as well. But on the aortic arc, we can see there are three branches. You have the brachiocephalic artery, the left common carotid artery, and the left subclavian artery. These three branches from the aorta are going to send blood to the upper region of your body, and they're sending oxygenated blood. Now, let's go ahead and go back and discuss the valves again. Remember, the functions of the valves are to prevent the backflow of blood. You can see right here, I will discuss the tricuspid valve, but you can apply the information to the mitral. I will discuss it in the tricuspid valve, but you can transfer the information to the bicuspid valve as well. Also, another name for bicuspid valve is the mitral valve because it resembles a hat that was called the mitra hat that European men used to wear back in the 1800s. So let's go and discuss the valves. What you see here are the tricuspid and bicuspid valve. But then these extensions that are coming out of it, these are actually the heartstring. The name of the heartstring is called the chordae tendineae. So these are the heartstring. The chordae tendineae, the heartstring, is actually attached to this muscle right here, which is called the papillary muscle. The papillary muscle is attached to the endocardium via the trabeculae carneae, which is another muscle. Now, what happens when your ventricles get filled with blood is that the trabeculae carneae is going to contract. When it contracts, it pulls onto the papillary muscles, which pulls onto the chordae tendineae, which are the heartstring. This ensures that the valves closes off so that blood does not go back to the previous chamber. So again, you have your valves, you have the chordae tendineae, the papillary muscle, and the trabeculae carneae. If you take a closer look here, the chambers of the heart, it is thicker on the left side versus the right side. The reason why is, if you remember, the right side of the heart, it's essentially pumping blood to the pulmonary artery, which takes it to the lungs and get oxygenated. The lungs are closer to your heart. While if you remember, the left ventricles, it's pumping blood to the aorta, which actually goes all the way out of your body. So therefore, the left ventricles have to be stronger, so they have a bigger myocardium layer compared to the right, because they're essentially sending blood throughout the rest of the body. Another thing that I want to mention is that in the two atria, you also have a muscle wall right here. This is called the pectinate muscle that you can see here, and it's much thinner compared to the muscles of the lower chambers because the atria are only sending blood to the ventricles. Now, between the two atria in the adult, there is the fossa ovalis, which is a closure of an opening that was present during embryonic development. So the fossa ovalis is this portion right here. It is a closure of something that was open during embryonic development. So that is the pathway of blood flow in the adult. Now I like to go over the pathway of blood flow in the fetus. There's going to be some differences. In the fetus, they are not breathing. So there's no oxygen that they're intaking in from the lungs. Instead, they rely on the placenta, which provides all the oxygen blood to the fetus. The placenta is this structure right here, and it is a structure that mom is providing all the food, all the nutrients to the fetus. So this is the placenta. Now, at birth, the placenta disappear, so there's nothing of the placenta in the adult. Now, what you see in the placenta is that you have the umbilical cord that's coming out from the placenta. The umbilical cord is composed of the umbilical vein and the umbilical artery. The umbilical vein is represented by this red vessel right here because it's supplying oxygenated blood to the fetus. The umbilical arteries is the artery that is draining deoxygenated blood away from the fetus and back to the placenta. So this right here is the umbilical vein. Now notice the umbilical vein, it is going to merge underneath the liver and it shunts in to the inferior vena cava. This portion right here of the umbilical vein is called the ductus venosus, which is the portion that is going to go in and shunts in to the inferior vena cava. So it merges in with the inferior vena cava. Now, if you remember, the inferior vena cava in the adult, that is actually the vessel that is carrying deoxygenated blood. But now in the fetus, because there is the umbilical vein that merges into it, now the inferior vena cava is actually carrying a mixture of blood, mostly oxygenated blood. Now then the inferior vena cava will then take that blood into the right atrium right here. Now here's a difference. In the right atrium, in the mammalian adult, it is oxygen poor. But in the fetus, it's a mixture of blood. There's actually high levels of oxygen in the right atrium because remember, if we trace it back from the mother, that is why. So because there's already high levels of oxygen and because the fetal lungs are just filled with fluid, there's no reason why the blood in the right atrium has to go to the right ventricle through the pulmonary artery to the lungs. It doesn't have to do that. Doing that would actually be a longer pathway. So between the two atria in the fetus, there's an opening right here called the foramen ovale. So the high oxygen blood that is in the right atrium can flow directly to the left atrium via this opening called the foramen ovale. So that's the first way that blood can bypass the lungs. Because now when the blood is in the left atrium, it can then just go to the left ventricle and then out the body, out of the heart via the aorta. So that's the first way that blood can bypass the lungs. Now, if you remember the foramen ovale, when the fetus take their first breath, that structure is going to close and become the fossa ovalis, which is what I showed you earlier. Now, let's say some of that blood does not go through the foramen ovale. Well, then some of that oxygenated blood would then just end up like it normally would in the right ventricle. And the right ventricle would then take it to the pulmonary artery. But there's a second way that blood can bypass the lungs in the fetus. Between the pulmonary artery and the aorta, there's a bridge called the ductus arteriosus. So any blood that does end up in the pulmonary artery, the second way that it can bypass the lung is just go directly from the pulmonary artery to the aorta via the ductus arteriosus. And then when at birth, the ductus arteriosus closes off and becomes a structure called the ligamentum arteriosum, which is what I showed you in the previous slide. So remember, in fetal blood, in fetal heart, the pathway of blood flow is different from the adult. The reason is because the lungs are not working. So they don't need to go to the lungs. The blood does not have to travel to the lungs because the lungs are just filled with fluid. All of the oxygen that the fetus need, they get it from mom. They get it through a structure called the umbilical cord, specifically the umbilical vein. The umbilical vein shunts underneath the liver, and this structure right here is called the ductus venosus. At birth, it becomes the ligamentum venosum, but when it shunts into the inferior vena cava, it's delivering high levels of oxygen blood, and that inferior vena cava takes it to the right atrium. So now in the right atrium, there's a mixture of blood. There's already high oxygen here. So it can bypass the lungs by going through the foramen ovale into the left atrium, Then it goes to the left ventricle and out the heart via the aorta. If it doesn't go through the foramen ovale, then it would just go directly into the right ventricle, which takes it to the pulmonary artery. But between the pulmonary artery and the aorta in the fetus, there's another connection called the ductus arteriosus. And this takes blood to the aorta directly, so it doesn't have to go to the lungs. Now, at birth, the ductus arteriosus closes and becomes a structure called the ligamentum arteriosum. Make sure you understand the pathway of blood flow in both the adult and in the fetus. Make sure you also know make sure that you also know what these structures become in the adult as well. Okay. Now, I just show you a 2D diagram. Here, these are actual heart models. Make sure you can apply all the structures that we talked about in the heart model. So go through the heart models and go through all the structures and label it in the actual heart model as well. These are the structures that are going to be found inside your study packets as well. To keep in mind, this right here, this would be the pectinate muscle in the atria. And just to show you, this is the ligamentum arteriosum. Here's another diagram for you to look at. From this view, you're looking at the lateral side from the left. So this right here would be the aortic arc, and this right here would be the tricuspid arc. This is from the back side, so you can see both the superior and inferior vena cava. This is another lateral view. This is a lateral view from the right side. And then opening up the heart chamber from the lateral view on the right side, this structure right here where it says 55, that is actually the fossa ovalis. So this is the closure of what used to be the foramen ovale in the fetus. All right, and this is it for the anatomy of the heart and blood flow.